there is a massive difference between what you have, which is type 1 diabetes, and type 2 diabetes, which I think we will labor on quite a lot and maybe be rude to some people. Anyway, let's understand what are we talking about, mate, when we're talking about diabetes? What is it?
So diabetes kind of it's a condition regarding insulin secretion and efficiency or uptake in the body. So type 1 diabetes is a condition where the body produces zero insulin
right
at the end of the day. And type 2 diabetes is a condition where of the insulin the individual produces, it's not utilized properly. So it's over-secreted for an X amount of carbohydrate or the response, and B, of that insulin that is secreted, it's not used efficiently. So it's the body's not very sensitive to the insulin that's been released.
Right, you're very well educated, as came across in the podcast we did on strength. Let's wind back. You're talking about insulin, you're talking about sensitivity. Why is any of this important to us as human beings?
Yeah, so a part of being a human being is we need some food. So of that food that is uptaken in the body, so we have, you can really label it, break it down to, proteins, fats, carbohydrates. So when we're worried about diabetes, it kind of all comes around to the carbohydrate utilization in the body.
Right.
And well, why is that important? Carbohydrates obviously are the kind of the main or primary source of energy. Obviously there's some other steps involved, but when we're at anything kind of above a low intensity, as well as other very important processes in the body, carbohydrate and glucose is a vital part of being a human being.
And some people are born with the inability to convert the food, carbohydrate, into energy. That's basically what we're talking about here, is that if people understand what Toby said, which is carbohydrate going in or energy going into the body, we need certain things to happen in the body, and we need certain chemicals sounds a bit bad, but that's basically, we weren't talking about doping earlier, honestly. We need certain chemicals in the body to break that food down, to turn that into energy to sustain life.
Definitely, right. So in simple terms, basically insulin can be described as kind of a anti-catabolism or a shuttle hormone. Okay, so it helps shuttle glucose into the cells that need it at the time, in its kind of most simple way of describing it.
Type 1 diabetics it's a problem from birth. It's a deficiency, it's a disease from birth.
Yes and no. Yeah. Yes and no. So it's an autoimmune condition. Some people are born with it. Some people can develop it through an unknown amount of factors involved. There can never be one single factor. Sometimes there is. I mean, maybe like a serious virus or something like that. For myself, I don't quite know how I developed it. I mean, maybe it was my diet at the time, stress, viruses, whatever, X, Y, and Z. But it came to the point where, so I stopped producing insulin.
How old were you when that happened?
It was a week before my 15th birthday is when I got the diagnosis. So, 14.
Talk us through how you got to the point where you were diagnosed, mate. What did you start to feel different, behave different, sleep all the time, have no energy?
Yeah, exactly right. So super lethargic and massive highs and lows and fluctuations in energy, basically. Right. So it's kind of a spectrum from when you are non-diabetic to type 1 diabetic. So your insulin secretion decreases slowly. So it's not you wake up one day or you go to bed and you produce insulin, you wake up, you don't produce any insulin. So it's a slow kind of diminishing process of insulin secretion. So across kind of a 2 or 3 month period.
That's quite quick.
Yeah, I guess in the grand scheme of things, yeah, it is quite fast. So basically, obviously, if you don't produce any insulin, you can't absorb or utilize any of the glucose that you've eaten, and as a result, you basically can't utilize energy from food. Is what it comes down to. Even people could argue, oh well, if you had fats and proteins, blah 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 blah, but the energy process of utilizing energy from fats and proteins is gluconeogenesis. So even if you eat fat, it still gets converted to glucose before you have to use it. So that argument's out the window. Bottom line is I didn't have any energy for basically 2-3 months. And of the glucose I consumed, it just circulated in the system and never was uptaken.
Can you remember that, like the start of those 2 to 3 months?
Yeah. So actually, this is a good story. So I remember it would have been about it would have been around, so my birthday's February, so 2 months before that would have been around Christmas. And
Don't forget, folks, what's day? What day?
The 4th.
I mean, it's coming soon, right?
Yeah.
So 4th of Feb, sending flowers.
So remember I was at my mate's house for a Christmas party, and I would have been 14 years old at this time and sleeping on his floor at the time. I remember I woke up in the night and I'd wet myself. And, you know, for a 14-year-old, you kind of hope you're at that stage by now. And super embarrassing, super confused. I didn't know him that well at the time. I mean, he's one of my best friends now, but I did not know him that well at the time. Not well enough to kind of wake him up and ask for a hand. I remember staying up all night trying to Google how to get urine out the floor. No. But anyway, so that was the kind of start of it. And that was super weird. Thought it was an anomaly. But then over that kind of 2-3 month period, I was getting up and going to the toilet 5, 6, 7 times a night. So you're not even sleeping at that point, because one of the ways the body gets rid of excess glucose in your blood is to urinate. Right. Yeah. So that's a big driving factor. So people who are undiagnosed type 1 diabetics will find they drink a lot more water because they're having to go to the bathroom the whole time, and B, they go to the bathroom the whole time. Mate, you're scaring me now because I drink a shit ton of water and I pissed. I had a piss 10 minutes before we were going to start recording the show, and then just as we were going to start, I went for another one. So I'm not going to get checked. Okay. So you've woken up at your mate's house, you've wet the bed, you're 14, and you can't quite figure out why. Yeah, I mean, at that time, it was still, there wasn't enough going on for me to think there's a problem. So, you know, you're a 14-year-old kid, you've got, the last thing you want to know is, or the last thing you want everyone to know is that you're wetting yourself. Yeah. So you keep it to yourself. Oh, no. So me and my friend had a pact, you know, we're not going to tell anyone, we'll just crack on. And yeah, so fast forwarding kind of 2 months, as a 14-year-old rugby player at the time, you know, keeping on weight, being as strong as possible for a pre-pubertal 14-year-old is important. And anyway, I kind of just diminished in that 2 months. I lost probably about 14 kilos, or 14 to 18 kilos in body mass, which for a 14-year-old who's not hit puberty yet is a lot in a short period of time. And by the time it kind of came around to my birthday, I looked like a skeleton. So, so yeah, that was the point basically. And my same friend, his mum was the one to say, you need to go to hospital. And so she rung up the school the next day. X, Y, and Z's got this problem. I think he's diabetic. But she didn't tell me, obviously. She doesn't want to be the one to break that news to me. No one. She kind of identified No one wants to be. Yeah, she was some kind of physician, I think a physio, but obviously is fairly switched on. Yeah. And then, went to hospital, got the diagnosis. How do they test you? Just glucose in the urine. Yeah. It's a very simple detection. How do they break it to you, mate? And maybe it's dramatic, maybe it's not. But like you said, when you're that age, you're quite fragile in a lot of ways, aren't you? A lot of people are still fragile. Yeah. Yeah. When you're old, you're still fragile. You go more fragile. You pretend. Yeah. Yeah. But talk us through how what was your sort of immediate reaction? Did you understand what it was? There was never a clear, Mr. Buckland, you're diabetic. It was just had the test. Nothing was said. moved to the hospital ward and they introduced me to insulin basically.
Wow.
So there was never because remember there was still questions, because I remember at the time I was 100% all in on joining the military, and so the nurses didn't know at the time obviously, and they didn't know it'd be a big deal telling me, but anyway it kind of just brushed over it, nothing intentional I'm sure, but the diagnosis was kind of brushed over into insulin. I remember thinking, so am I diabetic? And they just said, yeah. Like what do you mean? Is this not been, So it was, the problem was assumed, I guess. And I like to think I don't take anything to heart, but I was probably quite angry for a good year or so. Not anyone in particular, just at the situation.
Do you think that's a normal reaction, mate?
I would say so. I think it'd be normal not to be, right? As you're just a 14-year-old kid, you got enough to worry about.
And no support for it, really.
Yeah, so there is support systems in place. I mean, we're very lucky in the UK with the NHS. But the support is what you make of it, and also what people you get, obviously. So you have the specialist nurses and doctors and X, Y, and Z. But at the end of the day, it's you're managing your condition definitely from the start.
That's heavy for 14.
There's worse things. There's worse things.
There are, mate. You know, I mean, there's young kids getting diagnosed with leukemia at age 9, and you know, there's a lot of sort of different thought processes how you should tell them, whether you should tell them, whether you shouldn't tell them, you know, what bits. And but I mean, for you, you know, like you say, you're just straight on insulin, and this is the way. And I guess maybe you'd heard about diabetes before, but probably you hadn't. It's not something, I don't think it's not on the curriculum, is it?
No, no. It's kind of a condition in the shadows, I guess, because also of diabetics I've met, everyone's quite private about it. Whether that's intentional or non-intentional, I think maybe it's also kind of not the cure, the management for it, right? Injections. People don't like needles. People don't like people seeing people put things in each other's bodies. Right? Yeah, I guess is probably. And so it's not like a lot of people have problems with needles, and nothing against them, but you can't get around the fact of having to get a needle out and inject yourself. Even if the needle is as small as it is, I think it's not even 4 millimeters long. People don't like it, you know?